The galaxy had long operated under a delicate balance. Dozens of intelligent species, each with their own quirks and ambitions, maintained an uneasy peace through the Council of Unified Species. This body, a collection of representatives from the most advanced civilizations, ensured no single race could dominate. Yet humanity, a newcomer, was unlike anything they had encountered. Humans had emerged quickly, spreading beyond their star system with an energy that was both fascinating and alarming. They lacked the refined diplomacy of the Valek or the scientific precision of the Kroleks, but they compensated with an unpredictable adaptability that unsettled their galactic peers. Humanity's brief history in the interstellar community had been marked by rapid alliances, fierce skirmishes, and a relentless push to establish themselves. The Council saw humanity as a destabilizing force, a species whose ambition could tip the fragile balance of power. Attempts to rein them in had failed. Negotiations fell apart under human stubbornness, and trade embargoes were met with ingenuity as they turned to their own resources. The final straw came when humanity defied a coalition ultimatum, refusing to withdraw from contested systems. This defiance sealed their fate. The coalition formed quickly, a union of species determined to eliminate the human threat. The Valek, with their advanced fleet, and the Kroleks, masters of cyber warfare, led the charge. Other species, wary of humanity's potential, contributed forces, though some hesitated, uncertain if genocide was truly justified. In the midst of this, the Janai remained silent. As the galaxy's most ancient and peaceful species, they were the moral compass of the Council. Revered for their wisdom and neutrality, the Janai had not taken a side in any conflict for millennia. Their neutrality was their creed, their legacy, and their greatest strength. Marian, a Janai emissary to the Council, had been tasked with observing humanity. Her reports painted a picture of a volatile, aggressive species, an image reinforced by the Coalition's propaganda. Yet, something about humanity intrigued her. Their actions defied easy categorization, their motivations complex and often contradictory. The Council's decision to declare war on humanity troubled her in ways she could not articulate. As the Coalition prepared its assault, Marian petitioned the Janai Council to intervene, not to defend humanity, but to urge the galaxy to seek another path. Her pleas were met with quiet disapproval. The High Elder, a figure of unshakable authority, reminded her of their purpose. The Janai exist to observe, not interfere, he said, his tone measured but firm. Humanity has brought this upon themselves. Their actions threaten the harmony we have preserved for eons. But are they truly irredeemable? Marian asked, her voice trembling with conviction. Should we not seek to understand them before condemning them? The Council dismissed her concerns, reiterating their commitment to neutrality. They believed that humanity's destruction, though tragic, was necessary to maintain galactic stability. To interfere would risk shattering the delicate peace they had cultivated. Yet, as Marian watched the Coalition fleet assemble, doubt gnawed at her. She had seen the reports, the footage of human soldiers fighting not for conquest but survival. She had read of their alliances with weaker species, often defending them against exploitation. And she had heard whispers of their resilience, their refusal to surrender even in the face of overwhelming odds. Her role as an observer felt hollow. Neutrality was supposed to be a moral high ground, but in this instance, it felt like complicity. The Janai had always prided themselves on their wisdom, yet wisdom without action seemed meaningless. The Coalition launched its first wave, targeting Earth's outer defenses. Reports of devastation flooded the Council chambers. Humanity was outnumbered and outgunned, yet they fought with a tenacity that surprised even their enemies. For every stronghold lost, they established another. For every defeat, they found a way to push back. Marian's reports grew more detailed, her tone more conflicted. She described acts of bravery and sacrifice, moments of unity that defied the chaotic image the Coalition painted. Still, the Council remained unmoved. To them, humanity was a fire that needed to be extinguished before it spread. But Marian was no longer certain. The more she observed, the more she questioned. Humanity was not the villain the galaxy believed them to be. Their defiance, their refusal to bow, was not born of arrogance but of a profound belief in their right to exist. They were flawed, yes, but they were also extraordinary. And for the first time in her life, Marian wondered if neutrality was truly the noble path. The war engulfed Earth in unrelenting waves, with every day bringing new devastation. Humanity's cities lay in ruins, and their remaining strongholds were under constant siege. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, they refused to surrender. This unyielding spirit was what drew Marian to the surface, a decision that defied the Genai's principles of non-interference. Her mission was unofficial, hidden even from her closest peers. She needed to understand humanity not through reports, but by witnessing them firsthand. Her arrival coincided with one of the darkest days humanity had faced. Coalition forces were advancing, and every channel broadcast desperate calls for reinforcements that would never come. But as Marian wandered through the ruins of a once thriving city, she didn't find despair. Instead, she found resilience. In a crumbling shelter, she observed a small group of humans tending to their wounded. A woman, her arm in a makeshift sling, handed her rationed water to an elderly man who could barely lift his head. Another worked tirelessly to mend equipment scavenged from the battlefield, muttering something about holding out for one more night. There was no bitterness in their voices, only determination. A child approached Marian, her face streaked with dirt but her eyes alight with curiosity. The girl offered her a piece of dried fruit, a ration far too precious to share with a stranger. Marian hesitated, overwhelmed by the gesture, before realizing the girl expected nothing in return. This simple act spoke volumes. Even in their direst moment, humanity retained an instinct to give, to connect, to hope. As the day wore on, Marian followed the group to a nearby outpost. The air was thick with tension as the humans prepared for yet another assault. Soldiers stood in grim silence, checking weapons they knew were no match for coalition technology. Yet they stood ready, not because they believed they could win, but because they believed they had to try. Marian was struck by the way they spoke to one another. Their leaders gave no grand speeches or promises of victory. Instead, they focused on survival, on the lives of the people they were protecting. It was a stark contrast to the cold calculations of the coalition or even the Genai's detached logic. Humanity's leaders fought beside their people, not above them. A sudden bombardment shattered the relative calm, and chaos erupted. Marian found herself caught in the crossfire as the coalition forces descended. She watched in awe as the humans adapted on the fly, using terrain, ingenuity, and sheer will to hold their ground. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought as though they had already won. Amid the battle, Marian witnessed something extraordinary. A young soldier, no older than 20, saw his squad pinned down by advancing coalition drones. Instead of retreating, he ran toward the enemy, detonating a makeshift explosive that disabled the drones but cost him his life. The act was not reckless. It was deliberate, calculated, and selfless. As the dust settled and the coalition forces retreated, Marian found herself overwhelmed. She had spent her life among the Genai, a people who valued peace above all else, yet she had never encountered such profound courage. Humanity's defiance was not born of aggression but of an unshakable belief in the value of every life. Later that night, she joined the survivors around a flickering fire. They shared stories, not of battles, but of their families, their dreams, and the lives they had left behind. A man spoke of rebuilding his farm, another of returning to his wife and newborn child. Their words carried a quiet strength, a reminder that their fight was not for dominance but for the simple right to live. Marian's empathy, a gift that allowed her to feel the emotions of others, was overwhelmed by the raw humanity surrounding her. These were not the ruthless aggressors the coalition had painted them to be. They were builders, dreamers, and protectors. They were a people who, even in the face of annihilation, refused to lose their humanity. As she prepared to leave, Marian realized she could no longer remain an observer. The Genai's neutrality had shielded them from conflict, but it had also blinded them to their responsibility. For the first time, she questioned whether peace was worth preserving at the cost of justice. Humanity had shown her a strength she had never known, a strength born not of violence, but of the will to endure. Her mission to understand humanity had succeeded, but it had also changed her. She could no longer see them as a threat to the galaxy. They were a force of nature, unpredictable and flawed, but undeniably worthy of survival. As Marion ascended into the stars once more, she knew her path forward would defy the principles her people held sacred. Neutrality was no longer an option. Marion returned to the Genii homeworld, her mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. The serene halls of the council chamber, adorned with ancient symbols of peace, felt suffocating now. She had always believed in the Genii creed of non-interference, in the wisdom of observing rather than acting. But the images of humanity's fight for survival haunted her, and the council's unwavering neutrality felt less like wisdom and more like cowardice. She presented her findings to the High Council, standing before the elders with a conviction she hadn't known she possessed. Her voice trembled at first but grew stronger as she described the resilience and unity she had witnessed on Earth. Humanity is not what we were led to believe, she began, addressing the gathered elders. They are not the reckless aggressors the coalition claims. They fight not for conquest, but for survival. And in their fight, they display courage, compassion, and an unwavering belief in the value of life. The High Elder raised a hand, his expression calm but unyielding. They are also a danger, Marion. Their actions have disrupted the balance we have worked for millennia to maintain. Their survival would only bring more conflict. Perhaps, she admitted. But does that justify their extermination? Is our neutrality worth more than the lives of an entire species? The chamber buzzed with whispers. Marion could feel the tension in the room, the discomfort her words stirred. The Genii were not used to being challenged, especially not by one of their own. Neutrality is our strength, the High Elder said firmly. To intervene would destroy the trust we have cultivated across the galaxy. If we take a side now, we will be seen not as arbiters of peace, but as participants in war. And if we do nothing? Marion countered. What does our neutrality mean if it allows injustice to prevail? If we stand by and let an innocent species be wiped out, are we not complicit in their destruction? Her words hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. The council dismissed her arguments, reaffirming their stance with cold finality. But Marion was no longer content to accept their judgment. She left the chamber, her heart heavy but her resolve unshaken. She sought out others who might understand, Genii who, like her, had grown disillusioned with the council's rigid neutrality. Quietly, she gathered a small faction of like-minded individuals. They were scholars, engineers, and empathic seers, all willing to risk everything to stand against the coalition. In secret, they began preparations. Using the Genii's vast archives of technology and knowledge, they developed methods to disrupt the coalition's communications and neutralize their tactical advantages without resorting to direct violence. It was a bold plan, one that balanced the Genii's principles with the urgent need to act. Meanwhile on Earth, humanity was reaching its breaking point. Coalition forces had tightened their grip, and the remaining human resistance was scattered and desperate. Entire cities were reduced to ash, and even the most defiant leaders began to waver. Yet, even in their darkest hour, humanity refused to surrender. Marion's faction monitored the situation closely, their preparations accelerating as the coalition prepared for a final, decisive strike against Earth. Marion herself felt the weight of her decision more acutely with each passing day. She knew the risks. If their actions failed, it would not only doom humanity but fracture the Genii's unity forever. But doing nothing was no longer an option. The memories of humanity's courage and sacrifice burned too brightly in her mind. She thought of the child who had shared her rations, the soldier who had given his life for his comrades, and the countless others who fought not for glory, but for the simple right to exist. Finally, the day came. As the coalition's fleet moved into position for their final assault, Marion and her faction launched their plan. From their hidden base, they unleashed a wave of psychic interference, disrupting the coalition's carefully coordinated attack. Communications faltered, targeting systems failed, and the once unified fleet descended into chaos. The coalition leaders scrambled to adapt, their overconfidence turning to panic as their forces were thrown into disarray. Meanwhile, on Earth, the human resistance seized the opportunity. With their enemy in chaos, they launched a series of daring counterattacks, using every scrap of ingenuity and determination they could muster. Marion watched from afar, her empathic senses attuned to the emotions of the battle below. She felt humanity's hope rekindling, the Genii faction's nervous determination, and the coalition's growing fear. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of something she had not allowed herself to feel before: pride. The Genii had finally acted. They had chosen to stand on the side of justice, even if it meant defying their traditions. And in doing so, they had given humanity the fighting chance they so desperately needed. As the battle raged on, Marion knew there was no turning back. The Genii's neutrality was shattered, and the galaxy would never see them the same way again. But for the first time, she felt certain they were on the right path. Neutrality had its place, but there were moments in history when taking a stand was the only moral choice. This was one of those moments. The tide of the war shifted as Marion's faction, backed by humanity's relentless spirit, struck the coalition with unexpected precision. The chaos within the enemy's ranks was palpable. What had been a coordinated assault turned into a fractured, disjointed campaign. The Genii's intervention, though subtle, had disrupted the coalition's ability to communicate and strategize effectively, forcing them to fight blind. With their resources stretched thin and morale faltering, the coalition's unity began to crack under pressure. On Earth, the human resistance seized the opportunity with a desperation that defied logic. With the coalition thrown off balance, they launched counterattacks, not with overwhelming firepower, but with ingenuity and unrelenting determination. Makeshift weapons, repurposed alien tech, and sheer human will turn the battlefield into a place of unpredictability. Humanity fought not with the sophistication of the coalition, but with an unpredictable, chaotic energy that worked to their advantage. As the human forces regained ground, Marion sensed the shift in the emotional currents around her. She could feel the surge of hope flowing through the resistance fighters as their victory seemed no longer impossible. There was a fire in their eyes now, a spark of belief that had been absent in the face of overwhelming odds. The Genii's intervention had given them the time and the hope they needed to turn the tide. Marion, too, felt a growing sense of purpose, though it came with a cost. The Genii were no longer neutral. The galaxy would no longer see them as impartial arbiters of peace, but as active participants in a war they had long avoided. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back. She knew the risks. If their actions were discovered, the galaxy's response would be swift and merciless. The Genii would be cast out, branded as traitors to their own ideals. But Marion's doubts were drowned out by the rising crescendo of humanity's fight. She had chosen the right side. The Genii's wisdom, once reserved for passive observation, had now been put to the test in the real world. Their choice to intervene was a gamble, one that could fracture the very foundations of their society. Yet, in the moment, it felt right. The cold logic of neutrality paled in comparison to the warmth of the humanity she had come to admire. As the final battle loomed, humanity's resolve was tested. The coalition, realizing the disarray in their ranks, regrouped for one last, decisive push. Their forces, though still formidable, were no longer the cohesive, disciplined army they once were. The Genii's intervention had created a vulnerability that humanity was quick to exploit. But the battle was not without its cost. Human lives were lost, and each victory felt like it came with a steep price. But humanity's strength was not just in their firepower or tactics, it was in their unity. Marion had witnessed this firsthand, from the soldiers on the front lines to the civilians who continued to rebuild, who held on to hope even in the darkest hours. The human spirit, once written off as reckless and dangerous, had proven itself to be the very thing that could tip the scales in their favor. The final assault was a brutal, no-holds-barred clash. Coalition forces fought with desperation, knowing that their chances of victory had slipped away. Humanity, bolstered by the Genii's influence, fought with the understanding that they could not afford to lose. Each side gave its all, but in the end, the human resolve proved to be the deciding factor. As the coalition forces retreated, defeated and demoralized, Marion stood in quiet reflection. The battle had been won, but it had come at a tremendous cost. The Genai's actions would not go unnoticed. The galaxy would demand answers, and the consequences of their involvement would echo for centuries to come. Yet, in that moment, Marion felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The Genai had broken their silence, not just to fight, but to defend what was right. They had taken a stand, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. They had chosen humanity, not for their military might, but for the strength of their hearts. And in doing so, they had forged a bond that no force in the galaxy could break. The Genai Council would convene soon, and the debate over their actions would be fierce. But Marion had already made her peace. The galaxy would change, for better or worse, but humanity's place in it was no longer in doubt. The alliance between the Genai and humanity had been sealed in blood and sacrifice. It was a bond forged in the fire of war, one that could never be undone. As the war came to a close, the galaxy looked on, uncertain of what the future would hold. But one thing was clear: humanity, the species once dismissed as a threat, had proven its worth. And the Genai, the race once revered for its neutrality, had found a new purpose. A purpose shared with those they had once seen as outsiders. Together, they had faced the darkness, and together, they had emerged victorious. The galaxy would never be the same again.